finding x-intercepts and y-intercepts using standard form. We're going to read this first problem, find snacks in bulk. To get snacks for her class trip, Claire went to the bulk section of the grocery store where she could buy any quantity of a product and the prices are usually good. Claire purchased some salted almonds at $6 a pound. So I'm going to just highlight that right now. And some dried figs at $9 per pound. She spent $75 before tax. She used the equation 6a plus 9f equals 75 to represent the scenario where a represents almonds and f represents figs, and graph the equation of the line below. So we have over here the equation that goes with, or the graph that goes with this equation here. If she bought 2 pounds of almonds, how many pounds of figs did she buy? Use the equation or graph to show your thinking. So let's start, how can we use the equation to answer this question? Well, if she bought 2 pounds of almonds, remember almonds is the a variable, that means that a equals 2. If I plug this into my equation, now I'm left with only one variable. So I could go ahead and solve this for f and see how many figs she bought. So 6 times 2 is 12. First thing I did was simplified, and now I'm going to start solving. So subtracting 12 from both sides, I get 9f equals 63. And then divide both sides by 9. I saw f equaled 7. So she would have bought 7 figs. Now, how does that relate to the graph? Well, if I'm going to look for a equals 2, back to the start of the problem, I could look on the graph for where for 2 on the a axis, I guess we could call it, because this is the almond. So this is like our a axis, and this would be like the f axis instead of x and y. So I'm going to look at 2, and then I'm going to follow that all the way up until I get to the function. So see right here, I have point A. Point A, then I'm going to follow to the left, and I see that it is at 7 on the f-axis. So that way I could have gotten 7 for f. So she bought 7 figs. All right, part B says, describe what the x-intercept would mean in context. Well, the x-intercept, remember, is where we cross the x-axis, which here we're calling the a-axis, just because those are the almonds. But that x-intercept would be about right here, and that would give me some value for a, but notice that f would be here at 0. So in context of the problem, that is how many almonds she bought if she bought no figs. Essentially, she only bought almonds. All right. Now, C says, from the graph, it looks like the x-intercept is 12.5, 0, but it is hard to know for sure. What is a possible way to verify? So how could I verify that that is the correct x value for the x-intercept? I could use the equation. So back to our equation, 6a plus 9f equals 75. So this x-intercept is where y is 0, or in our case, f is 0. So I'm going to plug in 0 for f. So bring down the 6a plus 9 now times f equals 75. All right, I'm going to copy this over. And I'm going to bring it over here and simplify. First, starting with the multiplication, so I get 6a plus 9 times 0 is 0. So I don't even have to really subtract that over, because I know that'll just get me 75. So I have 6a equals 75. Then I'll divide both sides by 6. And so I get a equals 12.5. So in fact, that is the correct answer. All right, our next question. Andre's coin jar contains 80 cents. There are no quarters or pennies in the jar, so the jar has all nickels, all dimes, or some of each. Write an equation that relates the number of nickels N, the number of dimes D, and the amount of money in cents in the coin jar. All right, so we know that he has 80 cents total. So when I write this equation here, I'm going to say that the equation is equal to 80, because whatever combination of points he has, the total has to be 80 cents. All right, there are no quarters or pennies. That means that all he has is nickels, dimes, or nickels or dimes. Remember, a nickel is worth 5 cents and a dime is worth 10 cents. So for every nickel he has 5 cents, I'm going to do 5 times n, right? 5 cents per nickel. If you think about kind of that slope idea, this is not technically the slope, but it's the same idea of thinking. 5 cents per nickel. And then he has 10 cents per dime. So I'm going to add in the 10 cents per dime and set it equal to 80. All right, part 2 says graph your equation on the coordinate plane. Be sure to label the axes. Well, if I want to graph this, the easiest way for us to do it is to write it in slope-intercept form. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just take a second and actually rewrite it. Now, if you notice, nothing is filled in for us here, so we can really choose which one we want to be technically y and which one we want to be x. So I'm just going to solve for d. So I'm going to subtract 5n from both sides, and I get 10d equals 80 minus 5n, or I could write that as negative 5n plus 80. And then I'm going to divide everything by 10. So I get d equals negative 1/2 n plus 8. All right, so we've decided that d is going to be our y value and n is going to be our x value. So this is number of dimes, and this is the number of nickels. We have a y-intercept of 8 and a slope of negative 1/2. So I'm going to go rise over run, down 1 over 2, down 1 over 2, down 1 over 2, and keep going. Okay, so there's our graph. How many nickels are in the jar if there are no dimes? All right, well, no dimes would mean d equals 0. So if I'm looking for how many nickels are in the jar, then there's 2 ways I could do it. The first way is by using the equation. So I'm going to plug in 0 for d. So 10 times 0 equals 80. And then I'm just going to simplify. So 10 times 0 is 0. That 0 really just goes away. 5n plus 0 is just 5n. So I get 5n equals 80. And then I can divide both, that should be an 80, sorry. Divide both sides by 5, and I get n equals 16. Now, you might be saying there's a much easier way to do this, and you are definitely right, because if dimes is 0, that means that this is our n, or x-intercept. So I could look over here at the graph on our n/x axis, and wherever it crosses, that is where dimes is at 0, and we see nickels is at 16. So I could use the equation for number 4, or again, I could use the graph. How many dimes are in the jar if there are no nickels? Well, I can see right here that my answer should be 8. But let's solve it one more time because this is going to help us learn how the x and y intercepts show up in these standard form equations. So if there are no nickels, I'm going to have 5 times 0 plus 10 times d equals 80. 5 times 0 is 0 plus 10d. I get 10d equals 80. And divide both sides by 10. And I get d equals 8. Now, real quick, I just want to think about how we came to that answer. Could I have done that skipping all the solving steps? Well, notice that if the n is 0, let's look up here. If n is 0, then this part of the equation goes away, and I'm just left with 10d equals 80. Divide both sides by 10, and you get 8. All right, well, let's assume that d equals 0. Then I'm just left with 5n equals 80. Divide both sides by 5, and you get 16. So maybe we could use the equation without having to solve and without being given a graph in order to find the x and y intercepts. All right, for the next one, what if instead Andre's coin jar only contained dimes and quarters, and now he has $2? So we have to be careful here. In the first problem, we were dealing all with cents. So I had 80 cents, 10 cents, 5 cents. Now I have $2, and then I have a dime, which is worth 10 cents, and a quarter, which is worth 25. So you're going to have to do some converting here. That way we are in the same units on both sides. All right, number 1 says write an equation that relates the number of dimes, D, the number of quarters, Q, and the amount of money in cents in the coin jar. So right here it tells us what units we want to be in. So let's convert $2 to cents. So we know that there's 60 cents in every dollar. So I'm going to multiply 60 by 2, and that is 120 cents in $2. So to set up our equation similar to before, it is 10 cents per dime, so we get 10 times D, plus 25 cents per quarter, so 25Q, equals 120 cents in the jar total. All right, we're going to graph our equation now, but rather than coming up with the slope-intercept form, let's just try to graph it using what we saw in the previous question. What would be the d-intercept? Well, the d-intercept is when q is 0, so I would get 10d equals 120. Divide both sides by 10, and I get d equals 12. All right, now we can decide that this is dimes, and this side is quarters. So the d-intercept is 12. And then I can do the same thing for the n-intercept. Oh, sorry, q. So the q-intercept is when d is 0. So now we get 25q equals 120. I'm going to divide both sides by 25. And I get that q equals 4.8. So I'm going to put 4.8 on the q-axis here. And you can estimate it'd be somewhere around there since those ticks go up by 2. And then we could connect them with a very straight line. And in that process, we basically answered question 3 and question 4. So how many dimes are in the jar if there are no quarters? Again, just to reiterate what I did here, if there's no quarters, that means that Q is 0. So 25 times 0 is 0. 10D plus 0 is 10D. And now I can finish solving this by dividing both sides by 10. And I get D equals 12. And the same thing, what if there are no dimes? Well, that means that D is 0. And I'll simplify here. I get 0 plus 25Q equals 120. So I get 25Q equals 120. Divide both sides by 25. And Q equals 4.8. All right, so using what we just learned, what if it's not in context of a problem? A little bit easier because you're given the equation right here, so you don't have to actually set it up. You just need to solve for the x and y intercept. Now remember, the x-intercept, that's when y equals 0, and the y-intercept is when x equals 0. So we can just simply plug that in. So for the x-intercept here, I get 4x plus 5y. Well, I'm going to plug in 0 for y equals negative 20. And now I'm going to just start solving this. So 5 times 0 is 0. I can simplify that. 4x plus 0 is just 4x. And then divide both sides by 4. And I get x equals negative 5. There's my x-intercept. Now, if you wanted to write that as a ordered pair, that would be negative 5 comma 0, because x is negative 5 and y is 0. That's how we found it. All right, for the y-intercept, I'm plugging in 0 for x. So this becomes 4 times 0 plus 5y equals negative 20. And now I'm going to simplify and solve. 4 times 0 is 0. Bring everything else down. 0 plus 5y is just 5y. Dividing both sides by 5, I get y equals negative 4. There's my y-intercept, and if I write it as an ordered pair, that's 0 comma negative 4. All right, pause. You try B, come back, and I'll go over it with you. All right, make sure you paused and tried it on your own. So remember, for the x-intercept, that's when y equals 0. So I'm just going to plug that in. I get 3x minus 6y, but plugging in 0 for y, equals negative 18. Starting to simplify, 3x minus 6 times 0 is 0, equals negative 18. 3x minus 0 is just 3x, equals negative 18. And then dividing to solve for x, I want to cancel out that 3. So divide both sides by 3, and x equals negative 6. Again, as an ordered pair, that would be negative 6 comma 0. The y-intercept, that is when x equals 0. So plugging that in, I get 3 times 0 minus 6y equals negative 18. 3 times 0 is 0. 0 minus 6y is negative 6y. And now I'm ready to solve for y. So divide both sides by negative 6. And I get y equals, now be careful, negative 18 divided by negative 6. That's a positive 3. Or to write it as an ordered pair, 0 comma 3.